how this develops going forward. But I'll be back after a short break with our next segment. Welcome back, viewers. We're still here in Scope. Now, 6 years after the Rana Plaza tragedy that took place in Bangladesh and the garment factory fire that led then to international safety monitoring in the country, campaigners are now warning of grim consequences if such oversight ends or is abandoned by the government. We're going to discuss this a bit further and the role of international brands in all of this, as well as, of course, Bangladesh's own government and Supreme Court's role in the fact that this oversight may very well be abandoned at this time. Let's discuss that further with our esteemed panelists. We're joined by Vanpeperstraete, who is with the Lobby and Advocacy Coordinator of the Clean Clothes Campaign. He's joining us now from Brussels in Belgium via Skype. We're also joined by Dr. Mubashar Hasan, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Department of Culture Studies and Oriental Languages at Oslo University. He is joining us now from the Norwegian capital. And we're also joined by Ms. Aruna Kashyap, who is joining us from India. She's a senior counsel for the Women's Rights Division of Human Rights Watch, which, as you know, is an international NGO, and she's worked extensively on garment workers' rights in many countries across Asia. Aruna, Mubashar, and Ben, thank you all for joining us. Ben, I'd like to start with you, and I wanted you to just reflect on 6 years after the Rana Plaza tragedy. Do you think that things are better now for garment workers?
Well, 6 years after Rana Plaza, I think we achieved a lot in Bangladesh. Our factories are notably safer. There's lots of safety risks that have been identified in factories, mainly through the international initiative called Bangladesh Accord. But at the same time, we also feel that lots still needs to be done, because there's still safety issues that have been identified in factories that need to be remediated in order to make those factories safe. So factories are safer, but factories also still need to go and travel a road to become more safer. At the same time, we see not as much progress on other issues such as living wage and freedom of association. And we also think that there's much room for improvement on those fields as well.
Very well. Mubashar, what do you make of the 6 years later now, the Bangladesh government essentially saying it wants to take over this accord, this international oversight, saying that it can do a better job? What do you make of that, Mubashar?
I think there are some logic and politics behind this decision. Bangladesh government has been trying to minimize the brand image risk that has been created by the Rana Plaza incident. So at the same time, there are conflicting views coming out from the garment exporter who argue that the retail ban, the global retail ban, have not really increased the price of the product, and with this increasing safety, it needs cost. So the whole discussion, I think, is at the moment in limbo, and combined within the nature of the global political economy and the distribution of wealth in Bangladesh. And we need to wait and see how it ends.
It's a very good point, isn't it, Aruna? Because certainly the economics here are important, aren't they? It's not just Bangladesh's government which is responsible in this case, but all these international brands which obviously demand that costs are that much lower, ever so more on a yearly basis when it comes to producing their products.
I think one of the radical changes that the Bangladesh Accord brought about, which was quite historic, is that it for the first time actually cast a responsibility very clearly on brands within the framework of a binding agreement to facilitate financing. And it's very unfortunate that the manufacturers are not able to take better advantage of that in a manner that actually holds brands accountable. I think there's a lot of creative maneuvering that can be done with costing tools and so on that are being introduced, and campaign groups that are supportive of better costs. I think everybody's quite aware that the duplicity of brands needs to be called out, that on the one hand that they're asking for better conditions, but on the other hand they want to drive down the prices. I don't think anybody disputes that. The question is, why are governments shooting themselves in the foot by harming their own workers? This is their own citizens. By not holding brands accountable. I mean, and they don't have to do anything. All they have to do is support other initiatives, and campaign groups that are coming in with interesting costing tools and ideas on how to improve costs and wages to operate in country. Instead, they sort of have all these restrictions on freedom of association and are pushing back against initiatives like the Accord. And going back to this, what is the government's role? I think, the challenge in countries like Bangladesh, where there is a huge regulatory gap, which is, there is a significant regulatory burden on the government. Yeah. And there's obviously the number of inspectors available, etc., needs to be bolstered up. And this is where initiatives like the Accord can actually help in. If they cooperated and put a good transitioning model together, it can be a win-win. But they're choosing not to make it a win-win right now, which is very, very unfortunate for the workers.
Ben, I wonder what you make of that, because obviously the government, I imagine, Ben, would argue that, listen, Bangladesh is a developing country and it needs, its image to remain positive when it comes to, having these brands have their garment factory set up in the country to provide its citizens work. Obviously, as Aruna there said, there are obviously concerns about how its own citizens will be treated, but how does one balance that, Ben?
Well, but I think the Accord was really a response to help the Bangladeshi garment industry, because when Rana Plaza happened 6 years ago, Bangladesh as an export brand was a really tainted brand, like brands were threatening and concerned about the reputational risk that they would have from producing in Bangladesh. And a lot of brands were considering to pull back from Bangladesh. The Accord itself actually helped to counter that by saying to brands, no, you need to stay in Bangladesh, you need to take up your responsibility, and you need to be part of the solution by helping to fix it. So in that sense, the Accord actually helped to help Bangladesh to recover as an export brand. And we also see it in the figures. The export has grown. So in our analysis, the problem of the Accord is not as much a problem of reputational risk or anything. At the same time, I do agree with the two other speakers that obviously the brands, and that's what the Accord actually tries to do, are responsible for co-financing those remediation, and some of them are expensive. So this is, I think, a crucial element of the Bangladesh Accord. And I think it's also the only element of the Bangladesh Accord that is impossible to transfer to a national regulatory body. Notably, that commitment of brands to make sure that financing for remediation of necessary safety repairs are readily available.
Mubashar, do you think, Mubashar, that the Bangladesh government could do a better job?
I mean, it's kind of going, I can't really comment on that, because it will depend on fact-checking and other stuff. But I think the reason government is trying to assert its authority is that it's not a long-term solution for the local industry to have external influence. But at the same time, I think, as my co-speakers have argued, that the timing is not yet there. So it goes back to the point that a growing, ambitious nationalist government trying to assert a message that argues that we can take care of our safety. But again, the evidence are scarce, because recently there was a big fire in one of the old Dhaka city, and we haven't seen that much of good progress in terms of managing the fire and rescue and other stuff. So I think the best way for the government is to continue this discussion rather than shutting the door for further discussion with the external partners.
But if I may stick with you for a moment, Mubashar, in 6 years since Rana Plaza, the government has had time to discuss this out, hasn't it, with these international brands, etc.? Why hasn't it made more progress to a level that would satisfy it as well?
This is, third world countries' government like Bangladesh or in Pakistan or in India, it's not as efficient in many places comparing to the developing countries. There are a lot of bureaucracies, there are a lot of interest groups, and politicians are engaged in business too, businessmen are engaged in politics too. So the opinion and the policy decision makers are cumbersome process. So you really can't say that 6 years is enough or 6 years is not enough, because this has not been proven anywhere that 6 years has been enough to be a government for self-sufficiently impose the safety standard in the garment sector. Because Bangladesh, if you look into the Bangladeshi sector, it's quite haphazard. It's lot of things are happening within and beyond the legal mechanism, like other developing countries. So I think that we can't really say it's really 6 years is enough.
Okay.
But my point is that government should not shut down the door for discussion to external partners, because garment industry is kind of the blood in a kind of the main source of foreign exchange, foreign currency in the country.
Okay.
So it would be a setback for the government. So it should act.
Sure. Okay, I wanted to get a reaction to that from Aruna. Aruna, what do you make of it? Do you think that the government has been doing enough? Because, if we're talking about bureaucracies or whatever, and pressure on garment factories, I imagine that argument can be made for even the developed world, Aruna, to an extent, where everyone would want costs to be down, obviously, but it's about regulation, as you said, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think obviously the government hasn't done enough, and I think one of the starting points of the question is, what are happening to factories that are declared unsafe by the two private initiatives that were there in the industry, and what can governments do? And just to take this away from Bangladesh as well, I think this is not a problem only for Bangladesh. I think fire and building safety concerns are considerable concerns in other countries as well.
Let me go to Ben for a moment. Ben, one of the major issues here, obviously, and I believe we spoke about this last time, we brought up this topic with you as well, was that of consumer awareness. Because all of this goes back to that, doesn't it? If the consumer is more aware of what's happening and how their jeans or their clothes are being made, they would make smarter choices, wouldn't they, Ben?
Yes, I think the awareness of consumers has grown over the last year because there has been so much considerable attention to labor rights conditions and safety in the workplaces in the garment sector. So awareness has risen, but at the same time, consumers only have that much power. In the end, we do believe that consumers do want to have nice clothes that they like and that fit their personality, but at the same time also aspire that those clothes are not necessarily made in bad conditions or in unsafe factories. So we feel that there is a demand from the consumers to have safe factories. And obviously, brands are responsive to that. So in that sense, it is in the brand's interests to also have a functioning initiative such as the Accord to be able to say to consumers and to guarantee to consumers, yes, we are actually part of the solution in fixing factories and making them safer, and to ensure that the clothes that you like from us are made in safe working conditions. So again, this sort of links with why it's necessary at this juncture in time with a government who's not capable in filling that regulatory gap, that there is an initiative that can help also brands reassure consumers that their desire to have nice clothes, which at the same time are made in safe circumstances, is being met.
Okay, so I want to go back to Aruna, who I believe is back on with. Aruna, if you can hear me clearly, I wanted to ask you about the responsibility on consumers' shoulders, because, it's not like all of the clothes that are being made in places like Bangladesh or other garment factories around the world are made for just cheaper brands. They're made for some very expensive brands as well, where consumers can probably afford to pay even more if they need to, if those costs need to be passed down to them. Do you think there's a little bit of desensitization on the part of some consumers, especially in the West, about how their garments are even made?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of need for consumer awareness, and but that's increasingly growing. And I think there's data to show that the younger generation of consumers are more conscious and aware of concerns. I mean, the question is, consumers are also seem very impatient. I often get asked the question about, is there a tag that can be attached to clothes that says that this is ethical? And my answer is no. If you're a conscious consumer, you have to spend 30 minutes of your day reading up on some of these initiatives that are helpful to workers and knowing exactly what you want to look for. So, for example, as a conscious consumer, I would be supportive of the Bangladesh Accord. As a conscious consumer, I would ask brands, have they been ranked by Better Buying, which is a new index that ranks brands and says, how well are you doing on this index? So consumers have to read and want to spend at least 30 minutes and not just look for quick fix solutions like tags and certifications. And that's the one takeaway message for consumers.
Very well. Let me go to Mubashar with that. Mubashar, somebody who's a Bangladeshi academic yourself, I wonder what you make of how important it is for consumers to be aware of how their garments are made, especially those that are made in Bangladesh.
It's vital, and it is important for consumers to be aware about how their clothes are being made, in what condition, because it goes back to the ethics of the trade. But at the same time, this consumer awareness is not disconnected from the growing economic disparity that we are seeing across the world. The more wealth are now being owned by few people than ever. And so consumer can't, product's price would not go, if product's price goes up, in order to maintain the security of the labor. Will consumer buy these products? I don't know. We need to think that in that context, because the whole industry is a global phenomena, even though it is based in Bangladesh, and we're talking about Bangladesh at the moment. More and more people are paying more in rent, saving less in the West, and in Bangladesh as well. So I think we need to ponder upon that when we would talk about that consumer awareness is important. Of course it is important, but could they afford it? That is the question we need to ponder.
And Ben, I imagine there's a lot of politics at play here too, isn't it? These brands and economics, a mixture of both really. These brands could easily just move to another country, couldn't they? Which would give them a cheaper deal. And that would obviously hurt the economy of a country like Bangladesh, which for quite a large extent depends on these garment factories to continue churning out these garments. How does one break that cycle? We've spoken about a global compact of some sort, but is that really reasonable? Is that really realistic at this time?
Well, yeah, we believe indeed that a cut and run option is not acceptable from a moral or human rights perspective. So whenever we engage with brands, our imperative is actually that brands should stay where they are and actually start helping to fix things, rather than once there is a problem just move away and go to the next country or factory and wait until new problems arise. So we think that the solution is indeed to start also regulating brands and making them actually responsible for, legally responsible for identifying and stopping and mitigating human rights risks in their supply chains, so that they, once they establish a relationship, are not only just a client in terms of consuming and buying goods, but once that there are human rights violations, when there's human rights risks, when there are safety risks, that they also become part of making sure that solutions that are meaningful to those risks are happening.
Okay, we'll leave that as our final word. The clock has gotten the best of us. Appreciate, of course, all of your time, your insight and analysis. Our esteemed guests joining us were Vanpeperstraete, who is Lobby and Advocacy Coordinator with the Clean Clothes Campaign. He was speaking to us from Brussels via Skype. We were joined by Dr. Mubashar Hasan, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Department of Culture Studies and Oriental Languages at Oslo University. He was joining us from the Norwegian capital via Skype. And we were also joined on the line from India by Ms. Aruna Kashyap, who is a lawyer, and she works as Senior Counsel for the Women's Rights Division of Human Rights Watch, and she's worked excessively on the rights of garment workers in many countries across Asia. And now, viewers, as all of our guests spoke about, the aspect of economics is an important one here. And obviously, it's easy to blame the Bangladesh government solely. And of course, it does have some responsibility when it comes to maintaining this Bangladesh Accord, which many people would argue has made the conditions for garment workers in that country better. But brands also haven't been taking their share of the burden, haven't been paying out the costs that have been passed on now to the factories. So all of that needs to be balanced out. Is the consumer aware enough? Are brands doing enough? Is the government doing enough? Are governments around the world doing enough? All of those issues, complex web, but is it really being resolved? We'll keep a very close eye on that here in Scope. But thanks for watching. I've been Waqar, Rizvi.